Hello, everybody, and welcome to this UN Spider information briefing. We've got a few folks just logging in as we go here, but I'm going to kick off to keep right on schedule. My name's Ian Freeman, and I work here at the UN Office for Outer Space Affairs, and this is the first in a series of informal different areas of the work streams that are happening here at UNOOSA. Before I get cracked in, I'll just do a couple of rules of the road. So we got 45 minutes here. Could I just ask everyone to keep their microphones on mute? And we'll be using cameras for the speakers as they go. We're going to be hearing from each of the UN Spider members' teams here at UNOOSA. And then at the end of the short presentation, we'll have an opportunity for questions and answers. But please don't wait until those Q&A come forward at the end. Please do use the chat function here on Microsoft Teams to pose any questions as we go. As I say, we've got the full UN Spider team here online, and they're ready to interact with you in the chat function throughout the whole session. So as I say, please do make best use of the 45 minutes ahead of us. We are recording the session, and that is going to be for awareness raising purposes afterwards. So obviously at the UNOOSA YouTube channel, the UNOOSA website and the UN Spider website afterwards, so folks can also follow up on this introductory briefing as interest allows going forward. So in a nutshell, that's it. This is the first in a series where we're trying to introduce a bit more of the wider UNOOSA team here. And we're really excited to start with our program working on disaster management and emergency response. Because obviously we're still in COVID times, and there's still restrictions in terms of how and who can meet at the Vienna International Center here in Vienna. So we thought we'd take this opportunity to do these informal virtual get-togethers over the next couple of weeks to try and take you a little bit away from the VIC and into the work that the UN Office for Outer Space Affairs is doing on the ground outside in the field. And so that's going to be the focus for these series. And as I say, we're starting today with the fantastic work that our UN Spider team does. So I'm going to hit pause there, and I'm going to hand over to our first speaker, who's Mr. Koen Wissink. And Koen, the floor is over to you. And just before I do it, one quick reminder, please do use that chat. Ask any questions.
Thank you, Ian. Hello, everybody. Yes, my name is Koen Wissink, and I'm working in Vienna, for the Spider program. As Ian mentioned, we will do this presentation as a team, so you will see several faces that work in our team. But first, I would like to give you one slide on the USA. For people that don't know the Office for Outer Space Affairs. So if you can show the next slide, please. I see still, yeah, thanks. The Office for Outer Space Affairs has the mission to bring benefits of space to humankind, as we call it. Nowadays, it's often referred to by the Sustainable Development Goals that we want to reach. And the Office does that by assisting United Nations member states by using legal, regulatory frameworks to strengthen space activities and strengthen the capacity of developing countries to use space science technology and applications, and also to have the capabilities to use these technologies in their national development programs. So that is what the Office in general does. We will have a Spider program presentation, but first we would like to draw some pictures of what the world of disasters is, but that is what the Spider works with, and also on what the space technologies, how this is developing. So I hand over to Alice for that.
So as could mention, the UN Spider program brings together the world of disaster management and space technologies. So natural hazards are certainly not new, but their number and intensity are drastically increasing. According to the report on the human cost of disasters, written by the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, this decade has seen the number of disasters increase, as you can see in the top left image. The number of casualties and number of affected people also have increased compared to the 2000-2009 period of time. The economic loss of disasters has also almost doubled compared to the precedent decade. The other image you can see on the slide illustrates the increase in disasters during this decade, sorted by disaster types. You can see that, for instance, the number of floods has doubled, as most of the other types of disaster. There's only one type of event here that hasn't increased during the last decade. And according to the same report, this trend is unfortunately likely to continue, as it is estimated that if the global temperature keeps on being 1 degree above the pre-industrial period, the frequency and also the intensity of severe weather events will keep increasing. Next slide, please. So what are the benefits of space technologies for disaster management and emergency response? There are nowadays big numbers of satellites orbiting around the planet with a comprehensive set of sensors, enabling a global coverage in near real time. All those satellites also offer high resolution images and enable to sense and gate images of even remote areas where it's difficult to send human beings. There are also plenty of space-based technology and application available that are very useful for disaster prevention and reduction. So here we speak about like the different space-based technology we're talking about are Earth observation, but also navigation and positioning satellite systems, and also communication satellites. All those space-based technologies are very useful both in the disaster prevention phase, but also as well in the relief and recovery phase of a disaster. As a good example of international cooperation, we'd like to share with you this number. In 2020, there were 55 meteorological satellites contributing globally to provide data for the prevention of severe weather events. Next slide, please. So hopefully it's not only the number of disasters that is increasing, but also the quantity and quality of space-based technologies. In the recent years, there have been a significant development of the space sector, and we'd like to underline the following meaningful numbers taken from the 2020 World Economic Forum. There is a link at the bottom of the page if you want to know more. So in 2020, 1/3 of operating satellites are remote sensing satellite, meaning satellite used for Earth observation. And they are very useful to monitor various disaster variables. This means then like numerous opportunities of sensor to use for disaster risk prevention and reduction. This trend has been growing in the past few years and is likely to continue growing, as shows the number of satellites registered by UNOOSA. In July 2020, so nearly at mid-year, the number of satellite registrations has exceeded the annual record of satellite registrations. And we can certainly expect an even bigger number in the next years. And finally, another meaningful number that is worth mentioning here is that in 2020, nearly half of the countries have space capabilities, meaning that in 60 years, almost the planet went from no space capabilities to half of it having capabilities, space capabilities. This underlines the tremendous development of the space sectors. But also, if we are to consider that still the glass is half empty, that also underlines the need to support countries which don't have space capabilities yet for disaster management. So the 3 points really emphasize how the space sector is thriving and how important it is to use all benefits from it for disaster management. Next slide, please, Radu. So on this slide, we'd like to quickly illustrate one example of damage mapping assessment using high-resolution optical satellites imagery from Pléiades. So it's only one example among all the many possibilities of using space technologies for disaster management. So this mapping uses before and after images and a change detection algorithm to map the area damage after a disaster. This example was used in 2012 after the superstorm Sandy in Haiti. Next slide, please.
And herewith, we come back to the SPIDER program. So SPIDER started in 2006 with the mandate to ensure that all countries have access and develop capacity to use these types of space-based information that Alice just mentioned. And that is, in the example that Alice gave, was an example of how it can be used after a disaster, directly after disaster, to assess the damage. But geoinformation derived from space-based technologies is not only useful directly after the disaster, it can also be, it is also very useful in the recovery stage, as we call it. So as we see on this figure, we see that there are several stages defined before and after a disaster. And also before a disaster actually happens, we also can make use of data that we derive from satellites. So the next slide, please. The work that UN SPIDER is doing, we can distinguish basically 4 pillars. Our information hub is a knowledge portal where you can find applications, training material, and activities related to the use of satellite images in disaster management. We will come back to that later. SPIDER tries to bring agencies together in the countries itself by connecting disaster management community with experts that have the technical skills to actually work with the data, with satellite images, data from GPS, etc. And then SPIDER builds capacity in the countries through training sessions and more and more also online in a virtual way. And then last but not least, SPIDER provides advisory support, and we use for that support, we use in-house capacity, but also from our partners. So next slide, please. Currently, we have 3 offices with SPIDER staff that we see here. On the left, we see Bonn office with Juan Carlos and Radu. In Bonn, the Bonn office is at the moment focusing on Africa and the knowledge portal. On the right side, we see Shiris and Emma, who are managing the Beijing office, and they focus on Asia and Pacific. And in the center, you see Alice and me, where we run the Vienna office, doing internal coordination and outreach to the other networks. The main donors at the moment are Germany and China, but we are hoping to expand that with more countries and also including an additional office in Geneva. Next slide, please. For our activities, we can build on the capacity of our so-called regional support offices. Here, this map shows where we have cooperating agencies, space agencies or research institutes, regional offices or regional research institutes that help us to have this, to use specific expertise on the technology for disaster purposes. So colleagues from these offices, they join us when we do technical advisory missions or to prepare training material, to bring user stories to the knowledge of the rest of the world, and they have the knowledge of the region, so that helps us a lot if we have we do missions in the region to specific countries. We can invite them, and they have that experience for that. The next slide, please. This is a map that shows the countries that SPIDER has visited in 14 years of its existence. So since 2006, Spider has done in-depth analysis of the use of space-based information at national level. That are the ones that are in blue colored, and the desk countries have had additional advisory missions like training missions or institutional strengthening missions, as we call them. So not only having a thorough analysis, but also follow-ups. So, but this is not everything what we do, because for example, the countries that have received that came to our conferences or to our expert meetings are not reflected here. So this is really the minimum, but where we had some intense cooperation with is reflected in this map. Next slide, please. To summarize this, it's expressed here in figures. 96 missions that had some kind of 96 missions to countries, where 51 countries were visited and 38 received a thorough technical advisory mission. And as mentioned, in additional, we have remote, especially now, remote support, giving and training workshops. Now we have a slide, a small video from the Secretary General, who expresses the importance of disaster risk reduction. Since it is an important focus of our work, we would like to use this as an introduction of the work that we're doing, and that Shirish will present afterwards.
The COVID-19 pandemic has brought renewed attention to the importance of strengthening disaster risk reduction. Many countries are facing multiple crises simultaneously. We will see more of these. Extreme weather events have risen dramatically over the past 2 decades. Yet we have seen little progress on reducing climate disruption and environmental degradation. Bad situations only get worse without good disaster risk governance. Disaster risk isn't the sole responsibility of local and national authorities. COVID-19 has shown us that systemic risk requires international cooperation. Good disaster risk governance means acting on science and evidence. And that requires political commitment at the highest level to deliver on the Sustainable Development Goals and the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction. To eradicate poverty and reduce the impacts of climate change, we must place the public good above all other considerations. For these reasons and more, this year's International Day for Disaster Risk Reduction is all about strengthening disaster risk governance to build a safer and more resilient world.
Now I'm taking over from my colleague Khun. My name is Shirish Rawan. I take care of Beijing office and specifically UN Spider programs in Asia and the Pacific. Of course, our outreach programs reach to all parts of the world, not just Asia and Pacific. So catching on what's a message from Secretary General, he talked about Sustainable Development Goals and Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, and he clearly outlined that we need to strengthen risk governance. And this is what exactly UN Spider has been involved in. So when this third United Nations World Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction took place in Japan, and the outcome is Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, UN Spider was involved in entire process of formulation of Sendai Framework even 2 to 3 years before this particular conference or before the Sendai Framework came into existence. So we participated in all consultation forums at regional level, international levels, few at national level as well. And we provided, basically contributed the text on space-based information, remote sensing, Earth observation and climate observation satellites, geographical information system. And now we can find that text very well reflected in Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction. We also conducted special sessions during that conference in Japan and raised the awareness of space technologies or science and technologies in disaster risk reduction. Now, impact of this is that now when countries start preparing their disaster risk reduction strategies, they get the guidance of using space technologies for disaster risk reduction from the Sendai Framework. Next slide, please. So Another question comes, okay, formulation of Sendai framework has been done. Now implementing Sendai framework. So, and this is more engaging with the national governments or national disaster management agencies. These are our targets for implementing Sendai framework. So when we go for technical advisory missions in different countries, which Kuhn has already explained, you can see photograph here that we have been to several countries, and when we offer these missions, we offer policy advice. And on the extreme right side, you see there is a Nepal disaster management strategy. So one of the target of Sendai framework is that every country should have national disaster risk reduction strategy by 2020. So several countries have done, several are doing it. But our job is basically do the policy advice and incorporate use of space-based technologies in disaster risk reduction. This should reflect in the national strategies. And in Nepal, just showing one example among all, that they, based on our advisory mission, they included remote sensing technologies, earth observation, geographical information system in their national strategies. And that is now guiding the action plans for disaster risk reduction, emergency response. So that's how we are helping implementing Sendai framework in the countries, but not only limited to policy advice, but also developing specific tools that countries need for implementing Sendai framework, or even providing the access to earth observation data for understanding the risks of preparedness or early warning or emergency response, thereby catering all the global targets of the Sendai framework. Next, please. Next. Okay, so so from national level, then we have to also do a lot of work at international level, that is outreach and advocacy. Basically, that is our commitment to the disaster risk reduction community. So you see these two pictures here. These are conferences in Beijing and Bonn. We have hosted, I think, 10 plus conferences in each place. Also, there are conferences happening in Vienna, and more than probably 3,000 people have participated from all over the world in our conferences. And this is where we do our advocacy and outreach for promoting space-based information in disaster management. Besides these conferences, okay, this is a pre-COVID era. This year in 2020 and probably in 2021, we are going much virtual before we come back to normal situation, hopefully later part of this year. So besides this, we have a lot of regional workshops, global partnerships, voluntary commitments, or working groups, and also we work with international players like United Nations Technology Bank, UNOOSA, UNDRR, social economic commissions in different regions, and several scientific bodies like GEO, CEOS, GGIM. So just I want to reflect here that we are working very much with international community to advocate and give outreach for incorporating space-based technology in disaster risk reduction. Next, please. As my colleague Alice was showing some interesting statistics, she's saying that number of disasters are increasing because of climate change factor. And so more and more cyclones, more and more storms or floods and droughts are faced by the countries. So one of the important, and that is also priority of Sendai framework, there is priority 4, strengthening the emergency response. So what we are doing here is we are working with international mechanisms like International Charter, Copernicus Emergency Management Agency, Sentinel Asia, also some private data providers like Maxar, Airbus, or we also have groups like International Working Group for Satellite Emergency Mapping. So using all these resources, we are enabling national disaster management agencies to use space technology effectively when disaster hits that country. So in a way, providing them pre and post event earth observation images to assess the damage and plan their rescue and response plan. But not only limiting to that, but enabling the agencies to use this technology by themselves rather than we providing them maps. Of course, we have the network of 25 regional support offices, and we do provide them rapid response maps, but our emphasis is on enabling them so that they can access these mechanisms, they can make their own maps and use it on day-to-day decision making, or when disaster hits during disasters, they should use it for saving lives and damage to infrastructure. So these are some of the things I wanted to explain on how we are contributing into humanitarian sector as a UN Spider program, and also how Sendai framework is being implemented with our help. Next, I would like to introduce my colleague Juan Carlos, who is the head of Bonn office, to take over the next slides. Juan Carlos, please.
Good morning, colleagues. Thank you very much. Great to be here with you. And as Shirish commented, of course, we do provide advisory support to countries, and we carry out a variety of capacity building and institutional strengthening efforts. Here you see a list of some of those. We, of course, carry out training courses on the use of Earth observation in disaster management. We've done that in Asia, Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean. And we do it in two fashions. We do it through national courses, and we also conduct some regional courses. And in the Beijing office, they also carry some more global courses. And part of that effort is also to develop procedural guidelines that countries can then use, particularly disaster management agencies and their partners, and step-by-step procedures, or what we call recommended practices, to process specific types of satellite imagery, to generate maps of areas which have been flooded or which have experienced landslides or droughts and so on. One of the key efforts that we try to encourage in some countries is the establishment of technical interinstitutional teams as a way for countries and national disaster management agencies to benefit from those institutional capacities in different ministries and government agencies in these mapping efforts. And last year, the Beijing office organized a massive online open course. In the next slide, please. We also have the Knowledge Portal as a gateway to space-based information that provides information to countries on what the space community is doing. It also provides the space community information on what the disaster management community is doing. The portal, since 2015, has versions in Spanish and French. Last year, at the end of last year, we had more than 9,000 content items, and our average visits were around 40,000 every month. And some of our most visited pages are those that have these step-by-step procedures on the use of open software to process satellite imagery. The next slide, please. Let me give you now an example of how we provide technical advisory support to specific countries to enable them to be able to generate and use space-based information. Here's the example of the Dominican Republic. We carried out a technical advisory mission in 2010, just after the big Haiti earthquake. We followed up with the recommendation on the basis of the legislation. The legislation for disaster management of the Dominican Republic called for the establishment of a national integrated information system for disaster management, or CINI. So we identified that a group of professionals from different government agencies of the Dominican Republic, as well as universities and NGOs, could be established as a team that could facilitate the establishment of that national information system, and also for the generation of space-based information in case of disasters. So we carried out an institutional strengthening mission in 2011 to develop the terms of reference for that team with the support of our regional support offices in Latin America. We followed up with the training courses. We also worked with the National Emergency Commission to engage it as an authorized user of the International Charter Space and Major Disasters, so that their National Emergency Operations Center could then activate this mechanism in case of large disasters in the Dominican Republic. As you can see, they were incorporated as authorized users in 2015. In 2016, we worked together with the National Emergency Commission to carry out the regional expert meeting for Latin America and the Caribbean. We did also a training, and we were very glad to see that, unfortunately, because of Hurricane Maria, but the International Charter designated this AHEO team as the project manager to generate maps of areas which were impacted by these hurricanes. So in essence, this sustained effort allowed us to build the capacities of that team so that the team can then contribute to the activities of the National Emergency Commission in the implementation of the information system and in the generation of relevant and timely information in case of disasters. Next slide, please. Another example is that one of Sri Lanka. Again, we did a mission in 2011, and we have followed up with several recommendations and training activities. One of those recommendations from the technical advisory mission was the establishment of a national spatial database infrastructure that facilitates the exchange of geographic information among different government agencies. This infrastructure will facilitate the use of similar formats so that it's very easy for information from one government agency to be used by other government agencies in the same formats. We also suggested the incorporation of the Disaster Management Center as an authorized user of the charter, and it became an authorized user in 2017. And already in 2018 or 2019, the charter designated a staff member at the Disaster Management Center as the project manager for floods that took place and affected various regions of Sri Lanka. By 2017, also this national spatial database infrastructure was established. In 2019, the UN Spider program followed up, supporting the DMC in establishing a geospatial dashboard to support the monitoring of the implementation of the Sendai framework. And this last year and this year, two officials from the government agencies have been mobilized to a postgraduate diploma course on remote sensing at India's Center for Space Science and Technology Education for Asia and Pacific. The next slide, please. What we have learned over the years is that it is this sustained presence through the conduction of missions to countries over the years that allows us to really see concrete results and to have impacts, meaning countries are able then to generate and make use of space-based information. But we also feel it's equally important that we carry out awareness raising efforts at the international level, where we also invite our focal points and staff from government agencies and universities to our conferences conducted in Vienna, in Bonn, in Beijing, and in other countries, so that this facilitates the links with their peers doing similar types of efforts around the world. And one of the other things that we have identified is that, of course, in developing countries, young people are very much eager to be able to contribute to disaster management efforts, generating space-based information. And so we look forward to being able to carry out our provision of advisory support along these lines, taking up on these lessons learned. Now I pass the floor to my colleague Kun with the next slide.
Thank you. So this is a summary for this year that we are going to do. So the activities that we're planning to do, it's that we're going to continue or to give advisory support to 6 countries in Asia and the Pacific, 5 countries in Africa, 3 countries in Latin America. We will do international conferences either online or in person if possible, in China, Iran, Germany, and South Africa. So in South Africa will be a regional conference. There will be a new massive open online course. There was one organized last year that was very successful, and Shirish with CCSTAP, it's the regional office there, is going to develop another one. There will be virtual training workshops on the use of space technology for floods, droughts, and forest fires, fire management, for example. And there will be the use of data from global, that's to integrate global navigation satellite systems. So like like we call them GPS, Galileo, etc. in using these in apps, for example, to do damage and loss assessments, and to map, for example, to map the intensity of earthquakes. But there's more virtual training workshops. There will be a regional team for rapid mapping support, etc. But this is more or less the summary of the activities that we all do. Thank you. Yes, if we look at the opportunities for SPIDER, it's an exciting time where every day the data, for example, from satellites is increasing, as well the possibilities to analyze them with, for example, with cloud-based tools, and also by combining satellite data with more detailed data, as you see here with using, for example, a drone. That's also data that is very precise locally, which we can combine with data from satellites and then getting a very good combined picture of what is going on Earth. So new technologies, more data, advanced processing methods have a huge potential to be used in relatively data poor areas that the UN is targeting. And SPIDER is targeting these areas that are most in need and where the best potential is to give sustained support. So SPIDER will increase the list of countries that get our support, focusing on the least developed countries in Africa, but also in Latin America, Caribbean and Pacific. But at the same time, we will apply the model that was described by Juan Carlos, giving continuing support. So building up expertise several years and not just leaving from one country to another, but building up something that is really sustainable. Next slide, please. Most people that are at the greatest risk from climate change live in low and mid-income regions. And to make things worse, many of these countries will be exposed to multiple risks. So, which makes mitigation particularly this extra important. SPIDER will give more attention to initiatives that focus on disaster risk reduction, as was spoken by Shiris and the Secretary General, to respond to climate change and to face multi-hazards. For example, by using high-resolution digital elevation models that can be derived from satellite data. So we will enhance our partnerships with private sectors programs that can provide data also outside emergency situations. And finally, as it's mentioned several times, we will more and more use online learning tools, which has been shown very effective, especially in last year and now as well, in attracting large number of end users. So, but to go ahead with these plans, we are looking for sustained funding. So also this is a call for support. And with this, I would like to hand over to Ian for any questions that you would have.
Thank you, Koen, and thank you for everybody in the team. And as you can see, we have the contact details of the team right there on the screen. So we've tried to be quite general and quite fast because it's a big program doing a lot of things in different directions. So hopefully that has been a nice taster for you. And now moving into the Q&A session. So please do use that chat function to propose any questions to the team. I do see one question coming in. It's a great question actually, and I will put this back to the team. And basically it's looking for a bit more information about the biggest changes that you're seeing in the countries where UN SPIDER have delivered technical advisory missions in the past. Is there any particular area of commonality that you're seeing in terms of development of new policies, development of new capacity building, institutional strengthening? Is it really unique in all of the countries, or are there kind of concrete progress that we can point to across the range? I think you could all answer that question, so I'll leave it up to you who takes it first. But I think it's a great question. So please, Shirish, I see you on the camera, so over to you, please, sir. The floor is yours.
Of course, we have to go in different regions, but quickly giving examples of in the context of this question. In terms of capacity building, if you so instead of mentioning something theoretically, I would mention the what happened actually in few countries. Like, okay, Myanmar is in the news for a different reason now, But in Myanmar, our advisory mission recommended establishment of emergency operations center and remote sensing and GIS unit within it. And that got into their policies, and they established that with help of USAID and several other donors. In terms of capacity building, we took persons from Myanmar disaster management agencies to our regional centers in India. And also we conducted like 20 training for like 200 persons in Myanmar in different years. So now we have full-fledged remote sensing unit within Myanmar using space-based technology for disaster management. So this is how the institutional cooperation took place, or new institutional structure came into existence. And in terms of number of analysis and maps, now when there was a recently landmine, there is a jade mine and there was a landslide, Myanmar contacted us to activate the International Charter Space and Major Disaster, and Myanmar colleagues, along with our regional support office in Nepal, it's called EC mode, together they generated a lot of maps for basically monitoring damage in that particular landslide. So I'm just giving one example of country. There are multiple examples in Sri Lanka, Vietnam, and Nepal, and many other countries, but I wanted to address this question with one particular specific example. So any other colleague would like to contribute from other region perspective, please.
I would say that in the year 2020 with COVID-19, we saw an opening for developing countries to make more use of webinars and these sort of things. And this, I think, it's an interesting opportunity from our side. And we have to be open for alternative capacity building activities. So we've started trying to do virtual training courses and, of course, webinars at the national level to be able to continue the provision of technical advisory support and to train staff from different government agencies on step-by-step procedures that they can use and on other products developed by the space community to generate relevant information for decision makers. So I think that there is an opportunity to continue these, let's say, virtual support to countries that wasn't there before, or at least it was difficult for us to reach them in this virtual mode. So more and more we're taking advantage of that part. But as we mentioned, at the end of the day, what we are aiming is for countries to have the capacity to generate and use space-based information, taking advantage of all of the opportunities that the space community is making available in terms of open policies to access satellite imagery, and in terms of new products being developed that already have information stemming from satellite imagery that has been pre-processed, and also new tools, new open software. One of the areas where we see that we need to move forward is on the use of cloud-based solutions to give our countries and disaster management agencies the opportunity to process satellite imagery in the cloud, considering that at times institutions have limited or low internet bandwidth. So being able to find these solutions that minimize the requirement for high internet bandwidth is something that we will also be working on. And of course, we continue to benefit from the great support of our regional support offices. And we hope that other centers of excellence in other countries join us in this effort as regional support offices. And we would also look forward to having liaison offices.
You're
muted.
There we go. Great, thanks a lot for that, Juan Carlos, and it's a great question, because I think it really shows a little bit of hope and optimism for moving forward. And I mean, just one question from my side, and on that note, the open access to data and information being generated is increasing. But I would love to hear from the UN Spider team about, from your perspective as a user of this data, as a user of this information, is there anything that you see the space community, the international space community, has to do and has to get right in the next couple of years to really make sure that such a proliferation of data has maximum impact to policymakers and decision makers on the ground. So it's sorry for the internal question, but it's just a question back to you in terms of what does the community need to focus on to make sure that we really maximize the benefits of space information in this regard. Koen, please, over to you.
Thanks for that question. Yeah, of course, you're right. It's the data is enormous that becomes available, but it's also the processing capacity that you have and that you need to interpret it. So it's a lot of data. To make information out of it, you need, what sometimes is called as artificial intelligence, but also machine learning algorithms. It can be complicated, but what we do is we translate that knowledge and from the science into usable tools and information. So indeed, there's this bridge that we try to do, and so also there we connect with the science world that of course are working hard to use these data more and more. For example, the satellites in the past took an image every 10 days or so. Now they take them every hour. You can get every day. You can get new images of the same location with pretty high resolution. So it's a huge amount of data. But to analyze that, for example, to analyze what is a crop doing, that needs some interpretation. You cannot just, it's not just a picture. You need to process it. So that's really what is capacity to do that. And another element is to access the data. You need broadband internet connection, good internet connection. That's also why we are talking a lot about cloud-based processing. Instead of having to download, you can do it on the cloud as such. That's another thing that we like to propose, and also we need support for that, to get that capacity to do it on the cloud.
Perfect. And Shirish, I see you coming in, and just to kind of, so it's not just about access. So it's not just about having the data there, it's then being able to use it. Shirish, over to you, please.
Yeah, so building on to what Koen said, how we do this now, all these technologies are changing and new things are coming. We nowadays call it a fourth industrial revolution. So what UN Spider has, we are part of United Nations, one UN. And if you recently see, there is a very landmark report by Secretary General that is called Roadmap for Digital Cooperation. And this roadmap basically mentions that digital dividend comes with a digital divide. So there is also a negative element to it. So this is what the roadmap is so visionary that it really involves entire United Nations using our United Nations resident coordinators mechanism to really take charge of closing digital divide and increasing digital cooperation and ethical use of those technologies. So we are being UN very much part of this digital cooperation. So what Koen highlighted, basically, if that has to be implemented, then all these least developed countries, small island developing nations. So being part of this digital cooperation, we have to close this gap, have sustainable digital infrastructure. And once that is addressed, and we cannot address it alone, although our space technology is advancing very fast. So that particular, so we have benefit of being that community and taking that benefits to the countries through the United Nations resident coordination mechanism, and then offer benefit of space technologies for building resilience and disaster risk reduction. So total involvement with the UN community and other stakeholders, that is how we see that we can pass on these benefits of these changing technologies.
Perfect. Perfect. No, thank you. Thank you. And just for folks who might not know, so the resident coordinator system is a system of 129 individuals representing all of the different UN agencies that are working in that particular country. They have a small team around them, and they are supposed to be the voice of the UN in that country. So obviously working to break down silos and increase synergies across the different organizations working in the field. their respective mandates. And actually, just on that point, and perhaps just a final question from my side, actually, I'd love to hear a little bit more from the UN Spider team. And I know we touched upon it in the presentation, and we just touched upon it there with some great remarks from Shirish, but a little bit more about how UN Spider really does connect with the rest of the UN system. And so it's really that UNOOSA role that's kind of common across the different UNOOSA work streams. We have international space, and UNOOSA playing that linking role and bringing the power and data and information, the amazing capacity of that to bear across the UN system. So I just put this back to UN Spider colleagues, if we could just hear a little bit more about how that relationship works and how UN Spider works with other UN entities. So I'm going to see who puts their camera on for that one to take it on the UN Spider. Sorry for the internal point again. Juan Carlos, perfect. Back to Bon. Over to you, sir. Oh, you're on. I'll unmute you though. Yeah, there you go.
Right. One of the things that, of course, we've done is to identify which agencies are already promoting the use of space technologies within their sector. And there are many of those. Of course, you can imagine the Food and Agricultural Organization, FAO, does a lot of work in supporting countries in case of drought, in case of locust episodes. And of course, they make use of satellite imagery for that. The World Meteorological Organization, of course, promotes the use of meteorological satellites to improve our weather forecasts. I think one of the areas where we've tried to be able to push the use of space technologies is in the disaster risk reduction community. We have a strong link with the UNDRR, the Office for Disaster Risk Reduction of the UN. There is a plan of action of UN agencies to implement the Sendai framework. We contribute to that plan, and it allows us to link with other government agencies. In the area of geospatial information, of course, Kuhn is more active with the UNGGIM. This is the group within the UN that's dealing with geospatial information. So we do have strong links with UN agencies at the regional or global level. We encourage the use of satellite technologies, or we find ways to help countries to do that as well. We work together at the country level with UN agencies to do that.
Perfect. Great stuff. I mean, and thank you so much for that, Juan Carlos. Really interesting, and just another example of where we're really kind of just scratching the surface on some of your work. Shirish, I see you coming back in, so please, over to you. You're on mute as well. Sorry.
I just want to address the one question that is in chat, which we already addressed, but I just want to add a very important point here. Several countries that we went to, they are like either least developed countries or countries that are not begun into space technologies. So the largest change is like when we went there, we did not see any awareness and use of these technologies, especially for disaster management. They were completely disconnected from the agencies that use such kind of information within the country. That was the situation 7, 8, 9, 10 years back. Now the biggest change is almost every disaster management agency is including these into their strategies, these technologies, and they are now continuously working with us to build their capacities. And as Juan Carlos was mentioning, our partnerships. So being part of all that partnership, making UN aware to all our partners that how important is this technology in whole DRR areas. That is what also is one of our function that we do, and thereby we see some changes happening in the countries in a big way. And of course, what we said is more and more engaging with United Nations resident coordinator mechanism, because they are the ones who push the United Nations development framework in different stakeholders within the country. People in government keep changing, and therefore we have to be one with United Nations resident coordination mechanism, humanitarian response teams in the country. So we are very much involved into humanitarian response efforts, and this really needs our lot of energy to have continuous engagement in the country, long-term engagement. there's a long way to go yet, although we have big and well.
Yeah, perfect.
I want to add this.
Thank you so much, and I'm going to call time there because that's a great point to end on, and that partnership point, and certainly the UN Spider team and everyone here at UNOOSA is looking forward to hopefully extending those partnerships so we can expand these activities going forward. And if obviously anyone is interested in working with the UN Spider program, please do get in touch. I'm going to call time there because we started a little bit late, but I think it's okay. And we're now into lunchtime here in Central Europe. I know that we've got quite a few folks joining in right now. So if you got the time zone change a little bit mixed up, I remind you this is being recorded and we will be presenting it publicly. So you can play back and listen to this at your leisure. And at this point, I would just say thank you again for joining us. This is the first of a series of virtual brown bag lunches that we're trying to do across the lunchtime period. Apologies for being European centric, but UNOOSA is based in Vienna here in Austria. So please do tune in and follow us if you're interested in learning a little bit more about what the UN is doing on outer space affairs. Not just inside the boardrooms and the intergovernmental policy making process, but also outside in the field, because as you can see, there's quite a lot of exciting work going on. The next event in this series is next week on February 10th, and we'll be looking to talk with our Space for Women project team, who do some fantastic work on STEM education and STEM careers, working to connect leading female figures from the space community with those up and coming behind them. So with that, I'm just going to thank you once again for joining us today and look forward to keeping in touch. Thank you to everyone on the UN Spider team for a great presentation, and thank you for the participants in joining us here. Looking forward to keeping in touch. Enjoy the rest of your day. Take care. Bye.